It started with the Catholic Student Federation, and we had some remarkable people in Catholic Student Federation, including Jimmy Stewart, who was later my brother-in-law. And I can remember very vividly, we had been one time with some friends down to the township. I was at Rhodes University, been down into the township there and been absolutely horrified, talking to a woman he knew well, an older woman, who was looking after a huge mass of children. And her daughter and all her daughter's friends were looking after white children. And here was this old grandmother looking after all these children. Very thin, very cold, hardly had any warm clothing on or anything like that. And they gave her this wonderful welcome. You know, we were welcome to visit them there, and we sat around on boxes and crates and things like that, and they went and borrowed cups and milk and sugar from the neighbors and all that sort of thing, and gave us tea. And we had this wonderful experience, but with very, very poor people. And then I can remember afterwards...
What year was that?
That was 1948. 40, yes, or 47 even,
yeah.
Probably 47. And then afterwards, in the Catholic Student Association, we were discussing what on earth can we do about poverty in this country. We were so horrified by the facts as we began to understand them about poverty. And I can remember my brother-in-law saying, look, we've got to realize this is a matter of justice, it's not a matter of charity. And that was an absolute wake-up call. I mean, I think there were very few people at that stage, 1948, who really saw it like that. And that was very significant for me. It was, you know, the whole, at that point, practically everybody who was involved in the Catholic Student Association, it changed their lives. Nearly all of them were involved in the struggle against apartheid from that time onwards, you know, in all sorts of different ways. It was a very small group, you know, at that time. Catholics were regarded as something out of the Middle Ages, you know, and how anybody who is a modern person...
Is that still true, Anne?
Some people do see it that way, yes. And so it was, you know, it was a small group of people, but I suppose there were roughly, you know, at that time, 30 people involved or something like that. But it really changed my life, there was no doubt about that. And then I was involved in the International Catholic Student Federation, Pax Romana, and again it was this whole sense of recognizing that the Gospels were totally relevant for changing to the kind of world we wanted to have. So that part was very important for me.
I think for me, the social justice and getting involved was, I came from a very small town, and the first black I ever saw was at college, and we had 2 black people in this Methodist college. But I ended up going to the Peace Corps in Ethiopia in 1962, the first year of the Peace Corps. And we had a leper who was sitting on our doorstep the whole time I was there, these 2 years. And I was going to go into public health, and I realized I couldn't face that every day, because I thought public health would mean going into being confronted by people that were quite physically harmed by their diseases or whatever. But then I ended up in the YWCA, just like our former deputy president of South Africa. And they were very immersed in voter registration, voter education in the United States. So when I returned from Ethiopia to the United States, I got very involved in the civil rights movement, because where I was working in Ethiopia, there were 9 of us who were Peace Corps volunteers, 3 were black Americans. And boy, did they educate us on the civil rights movement. And so I think that I got much more involved in civil rights than anti-Vietnam War. As many things happen in the States, your activist groups get kind of polarized. So those people who were anti-Vietnam War were mainly whites. Those people who were involved in the civil rights movement were mainly black. And so I was in the civil rights stuff. And then when you have the No Aid to the Contras in the 1980s.
You're going so fast to the 80s already.
I'm illustrating a point,
yes, okay.
that this separation of
Sure.
white and black was, those people were involved in
Yes.
the disengagement with South Africa were mainly black, and those that were mainly contrary, no aid to the Contras, were mainly white. And I, of course, was on the South African stuff, so that whole integration into the black world was more my understanding of justice, or kind of got exposed to it, or felt more at home.
But you see, long before that, I got involved in the Grail, and so that was a major thing for me. I had met somebody from the Grail while I was in Europe as a student, and she said, oh, they've started a centre in South Africa, and they had a little old farmhouse not very far from Liliesleaf, as a matter of fact, in Rivonia, which was then not built up at all. I've just been back to Sandton, and wow, what a change from the days when I was there. But I got involved in the Grail, went for Grail training in the States, which was very much committed really to building a just world on a spiritual base, had a very strong spiritual thing. And then from there I was sent to Uganda, so I spent 4 years in a small town in Uganda teaching English, and there I started feeling, it's no good just working with the girls in school, we needed to work with families too, so we started women's clubs all over. So it was really an amazing way of getting to know Africa, getting to speak Luganda and all that kind of stuff, and that made a huge difference. It somehow, well, for most South Africans at that time, the rest of Africa was very unreal. But to spend 4 years in Uganda, in an area where there were no other white people, there was one group of priests in Masaka, 30 kilometers away from us, and otherwise there were no white people in the area at all. So it was really quite an important experience.
And also, I think it's important to say that Uganda was not a colony.
Yes, because Uganda had never been colonized, there was a degree of sort of confidence and sort of self-assurance about people there, that there was no sense of being in any way inferior to anybody else at that point.
Which is also true about Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Because the Ethiopians had
such
7
a
years
short
of
time of
Italians, and all they left was spaghetti and...
Yeah.
And
so I think both of us had very positive experiences in East Africa at that time.